Welcome back to part 2. This is Yahusha Ha Mashiach and the truth about the Jews. We continue. Yahusha is the name of the Savior, the Messiah. Yahusha means Yahuwah is salvation, the name of Ha Mashiach. Also the leader of the tribe of Ephraim, Yahusha son of Nun, that led the children of Yasharel into the promised land. Husha is the accurate Hebrew transliteration for the personification of salvation. Hosea, or what they call Hoshea, was yet another Masoretic corruption. Changes were made to Hebraic phonology in the 8th century. Husha means save, deliver, rescue. Moshe added a yod to the name Husha in Numbers 13:16, making it Yahusha, the man who later led Israelites into the promised land. From KJV. These are the names of the men which Moses sent to spy out the land, and Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun Jehoshua. It should read as follows, and Moshe called Husha the son of Nun Yahusha. The book of the prophet Hosea is actually Husha. Messiah was given the same name as Joshua. This can be proven even through the Septuagint translations. The Septuagint, in translating ancient Hebrew to Koine Greek, translated the name Yahusha as Iesus. The one who in our common scriptures is called Joshua is translated as Iesus because the name of the Messiah should be the same as that of Joshua son of Nun. But they gave a Grecian translation to a name that should have strictly remained Hebrew, which is Yahusha. Yahusha is also found in the Tanakh, which is the Hebrew Bible, and it is mentioned there 216 times. It means, among other wonderful meanings, to avenge, defend, deliver, help, to bring salvation, to be a savior, to obtain victory. The composition for his name is in these Hebrew letters, from left to right: Yod, He, U, Shin, Ayin, He, which translates to I am He. Particularly, I am He who avenges, delivers, helps, preserves, rescues, saves, brings salvation, your Savior who brings you to victory. John 18:4-8. Yahusha fully realized all that was going to happen to him, so he stepped forward to meet them. Who are you looking for? He asked. Yahusha the Nazarene, they replied. I am he, Yahusha said. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. As Yahusha said, I am he, they all drew back and fell to the ground. Once more he asked them, who are you looking for? And again they replied, Yahusha the Nazarene. I told you I am he, Yahusha said. And since I am the one you want, let these others go. Matthew 14:27. And immediately Yahusha spake to them, saying, Be of good courage, I am he, be not afraid. John 4:26. Yahusha saith to her, I am he who am speaking to thee. Yeshua does mean salvation, but in the abstract sense. It means something saved, the object crying out for help. Yahusha is the pronoun, Yeshua is the verb. For example, in Psalm 91, from verse 14-16, Because he has loved me, therefore I will deliver him. I will exalt him because he has known my name. He shall call upon me, and I will hear him. I will be with him in trouble. I will deliver and glorify him. With long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. That salvation there is Yeshua, because it speaks of the object seeking deliverance. Yah will show his deliverance power to the object crying out for help. It's still questionable why they used Yeshua to refer to the Messiah, the Savior. From Strong's lexicon, Yeshua is the noun in the feminine, meaning something saved. Then when we look at Shua from Strong's lexicon, it says the word is derived from the Hebrew root shavah, meaning to cry out or to call for help. The Jews have been behind many dangerous conspiracies. We have proven that they've lied about their identity. Therefore, you can be rest assured that they've lied about far more dangerous things. One of them is their influential involvement in the transatlantic slave trade. When you look into common public domain sources, you are unlikely to come across any information supporting the claim that Jews were heavily influential in the transatlantic slave trade. Some have gone as far as to claim that Jews were too few in number, neglected and isolated to have had any substantial impact on the slave trade. Eli Faber, in his 1998 apologetic, Jews, Slaves, and the Slave Trade, Setting the Record Straight, claimed that Jews were, quote, virtually irrelevant to the history of slavery and the slave trade in the New World. Open and objective historical inquiry, however, shows the evidence of the exact opposite being true, that indeed Jews owned the slave ships and had a very prominent, even leading role in the whole scheme. This is even supported by predominantly scholarly sources authored by Jewish historians. In the book, The Jewish Onslaught by Tony Martin, he asks, if it is established that white people enslaved Africans, and if Jews were an important part of white society, then why should anyone be upset by a book that illustrates the Jewish role in the slave trade? In North America, Rhode Island was undoubtedly the center of the transatlantic slave trade, having more slaves per capita than any other New England state. Two Jewish individuals, Aaron Lopez and his partner, Jacob Rodriguez Rivera, owned the most successful slaving business in the state. They were of Sephardic origin. All 22 Newport distilleries that served the Triangle slave trade were Jewish-owned. Even the synagogue in Newport, Rhode Island, was built by African slaves. In New York, Jewish merchants were involved largely in the trade of agricultural products, such as rum, slaves, and manufactured goods. They engaged in trade with fellow Jews in Barbados, Curacao, St. Thomas, Suriname, and Jamaica, which were New York's key trade connections beyond England. Jewish historian Peter Wiernik directly asserted that this trade was, quote, principally in the hands of the Jews. Stanley Feldstein describes something similar. He notes, America's Jewish merchants, using their religio-commercial connections, enjoyed a competitive advantage over many non-Jews engaged in that same lucrative intercolonial trade. Since the West Indian trade was a necessity to America's economy, and since this trade was, in varying degrees, controlled by the Jewish mercantile houses, American Jewry was influential in the commercial destiny of Britain's overseas empire. End quote. In Virginia, numerous Jews immigrated there and integrated into the plantation economy. Elias Legardo arrived on the ship Abigail in 1621, while Joseph Mose and Rebecca Isaac arrived on the Elizabeth in 1624. Manuel Rodriguez owned a plantation in Lancaster County by 1652, and David da Costa was exporting tobacco from his plantation by 1658. The two previously mentioned vessels, Abigail and Elizabeth, are among the most well-known slave ships. The following image is extracted from the 4-volume series titled Documents Illustrative of the History of the Slave Trade to America by historian Elizabeth Donnan, and it documents the Jewish-owned ships that played a significant role in the transatlantic slave trade. In South Carolina, by 1826, the total value of slaves in the South was approximately $300 million, with about 1/5 belonging to the residents of South Carolina. The demand for slaves had increased so significantly that by 1860, a slave's value was 7 to 10 times higher than at the end of the Revolutionary War. Charleston, South Carolina, was home to, quote, the most cultured and wealthiest Jewish community in America. The Jewish community in Charleston flourished initially due to a thriving business in slaves. The city was once one of the great centers of Jewish commerce, which saw a decline only after the emancipation of slaves. In 1733, a group of Jewish immigrants arrived in Georgia from London as land grants were being distributed. Georgia was the first colony to explicitly prohibit slavery, a policy that significantly impacted its settlement. Similar to the Caribbean, the settlers soon felt that they could not sustain their livelihoods without black slaves, and they petitioned the English trustees for, quote, the right to use Negro labor. With Jews now making up over 1/3 of the population, they sought permission from the Gentile colonists to be allowed to sign the petition. Overall, in the United States, records show that at minimum, well over 20% of the U.S. slave owners were Jews, despite being few, that is, of 0.7% population at the time. In South America and the Caribbean, Jews dominated in slave trade and slave ownership. In Brazil, Portuguese Jews landed in 1503, led by explorers Fernando de Noronha and Gaspar da Gama, who had secured a near monopoly on settlement in the area from the Portuguese king. Bringing with them sugarcane, technical expertise, and slaves, they swiftly turned Brazil into, quote, the most important area of sugar production in the world. This industry became so vital that some scholars argue Portugal's survival as an independent nation depended on the Brazilian sugar trade. By 1600, Jewish settlers controlled the plantations, the bulk of the slave trade, over 100 sugar mills with at least 10,000 Africans, and most of the exports of processed sugar. In this clipping from the Jewish Encyclopedia, it is written, "During the 17th century, the sugar industry was monopolized by the Jews, and with their expulsion from Brazil, it was transplanted to the West Indies, where the invention of new sugar mills benefited the sugar trade in Barbados." It adds, "The Jews of Georgia in general found the production of indigo, rice, corn, and cotton more profitable. In fact, the cotton plantations in many parts of the South were wholly in the hands of the Jews, and as a consequence, slavery found its advocates among them." Regarding Curaçao, Jewish scholars Isaac and Susan Emanuel reported that the shipping business in this area, which was a major slave trade depot, was mainly a Jewish enterprise. In recollecting America's Civil War, Batam Wallace Corn, in his paper, Jews and Negro Slavery in the Old South, writes, "Many writers will be so enamored of their theories that they will overlook the all-pervasive influence of the crucial problem, slavery. Had Negro slavery not been an integral part of the life of the Old South, there would have been no conflict, no secession, no war. Differences there might have been, but not violence and bloodshed. Slavery was the single indigestible element in the life of the American people, which fostered disunion, strife, and carnage, just as the concomitant race problem has continued to an important degree to be a divisive force in American life to this day." He further notes, "Colonial period was the heyday of slave importation from Africa, and Northern Jews were far more active in this aspect of the slave trade than Southern Jews. Furthermore, Jewish settlers in the West Indian colonies were at least as influential as those in the North American mainland, and the study of slavery during that time would therefore require extensive reference to those non-Southern Jewish communities." I like this statement because it makes it clear that colonialism predated slavery. Due to colonialism, Europeans and other nationalities had access to the Hebrews in Africa who were then shipped to various parts of the world. We've always been made to understand that slavery and colonization were two entirely different concepts, one being more vile than the other. But the truth is, slavery was the son of colonialism, which was happening not just in Africa, but as far as the West Indian states. Here's more from Mr. Korn. "Acts of kindness toward Negroes were the only relief in the reality of a system which placed white masters in a position of absolute control over their slaves. Jews participated in every aspect and process of the exploitation of the defenseless blacks. The most extreme case on record was the murder of a slave by Joseph Cohen of Lynchburg, Virginia in 1819, a crime for which he was indicted, tried, and convicted. Although, of course, the penalty for the murder of a Negro by a white man was much less severe than the penalty for a trivial misdemeanor committed by a Negro." In Revelation 2:9 and 3:9, the Messiah emphatically expresses his disdain for the Jews, those who say they are Yahudim but are not, but do lie. He plainly calls them the synagogue of Satan. What many do not understand is that this is a literal description of who Jews are. They worship Satan. In the book Freemasonry and Judaism, Secret Powers Behind Revolution, the author states, "What is the directing influence in Freemasonry? Many people answer, the Jewish power. Here we enter upon a forbidden subject on which it is prohibited to touch, for the Jewish question is closely linked with the Masonic question. At present time, Jews and Freemasons are working in collaboration throughout the whole world for the triumph of the universal revolution. The high Masonic posts are for the most part held by Jews in various countries. There are lodges which are exclusively Jewish, such as the notorious Masonic Order of B'nai B'rith, whose headquarters is in Chicago. The Jewish spirit dominates Masonry and imprints upon it that anti-Christian hatred, the fierceness of which would otherwise be difficult to explain. Masonry everywhere upholds and defends Jewish interests. Some have justifiably claimed that Jews created Masonry for the entire purpose of corrupting nations of Christian civilization. Guggenot de Mussol, a French writer and journalist, wrote, the Jews have entirely created Masonry in order to corrupt the nations of Christian civilization and to propagate behind this veil the general revolution which is to bring about the domination of Israel. It is simply a tool and a means in the hands of the Jews. The article of Dr. Isaac M. Wise, published in the Israelite of America on 3rd August 1866, supports this claim. It notes, Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees, charges, passwords, and explanations are Jewish from beginning to end. End quote. The Jewish Tribune newspaper in 1927 in an editorial stated, Freemasonry is based on Judaism. Eliminate the teachings of Judaism from Masonic ritual, and what is left? Let's have a look at this picture. It shows the star that is on the flag of Israel. In Richardson's Monitor of Freemasonry, page 64, this symbol is used to illustrate the Royal Ark degree. Masonic literature is replete with examples of the Jewish Star of David and other Kabbalistic tokens, symbols, emblems, and signs. In 1901, the German Mason Findel wrote, "It is less a question of a struggle for the interest of humanity than a struggle for the interest and domination of Judaism. And, in this struggle, Judaism reveals itself as the dominant power to which Freemasonry must submit. Indeed, we should not be astonished by this, for in a hidden and carefully disguised manner, Judaism already is in fact the dominating power in many a great lodge of Europe. So far as Germany is concerned, it must not be forgotten that it is master of the financial and commercial markets, master of the press, both political and Masonic, and that millions of Germans are financially its debtors." End quote. Ray Novosel, writing from Australia in 2004, stated, "Zionist world leaders, men in influential positions with the various Masonic organizations everywhere, have worked hand in glove for a universal world revolution, which will bring in the one world church and a one world government. Many Masonic lodges are exclusively Jewish, as are the controlling B'nai B'rith lodges, the mother of the infamous and very dangerous Anti-Defamation League." End quote. Jewish history as well bears this out, that a majority of Jews are Masons. This is particularly captured by the acclaimed ritualistic murder practices, which are often associated with Masonry. There are chronicled incidents of Jewish ritual murders similar to those claimed to happen often in Hollywood, which again is largely owned by the Jews and rumored to be founded on Masonry and Satanism. From Metapedia, Jewish ritual murder is the alleged murder by a Jew or Jews for ritual purposes. Argued libelous allegations involving alleged use of blood from non-Jews are often termed blood libel. End quote. However, this accusation of blood libel has persisted for hundreds of years, corroborated by a large quantity of reported incidents in historical texts. One compilation has documented 135 such incidents, while another source cites as many as 159. The book, The Jews and Ritual Murders of Christian Babies, a theological and legal study, is one such example. From the book's preface, contrary to the universally held and politically correct opinion, Jewish ritual murders are not an anti-Semitic prejudice or an evil blood libel which originated in the Dark Middle Ages, but are quite real and have existed for about 1,000 years. Nor is it true that confessions to such murders were always extorted under torture. The fact is that the reality of Jewish ritual murders has been repeatedly proven in modern trials using modern rules of evidence, as it happened so many times in the Russian Empire in the 19th and early 20th century. End quote. A few of these cases will be highlighted, focusing specifically on those mentioned in multiple sources to ensure historical validity. But first, other accounts exist, such as that of Democritus, a Greek historian, who wrote the book titled On the Judeans. In it, he noted, the Jews were bowing down to the golden head of a donkey, and that, hunting a foreigner every 7 years, they were making an offering of him, tearing his flesh into thin strips, and in this way, killing him. Another account by Appian, another Greek historian, states, Antiochus found in the Jerusalem temple a secret room with a table, on which a man was reclining. He stretched out his right hand and implored him to set him free. He said that he was a Greek and that, while traveling about the province for his livelihood, he was suddenly kidnapped by men of a foreign race and conveyed to the temple. There he was shut up and seen by nobody, but was fattened on feasts. He heard of the unutterable law of the Jews, for the sake of which he was being fed. The secret law was that the Jews were commanded to offer human sacrifices each year at a certain time. The practice was repeated annually at a fixed season. They would kidnap a Greek foreigner, fatten him up, and then convey him to a wood, where they slew him, sacrificed his body with their customary ritual, partook of his flesh, ate his internal organs, and while immolating the Greek, swore an oath of hostility to the Greeks." End quote. We continue with a selection of the cases as mentioned before. 1071 AD. During the celebration of Passover, a group of Jews residing in Blois, a town in France, carried out the ritual crucifixion of a Christian child. According to the accounts, after the child had died, they callously placed his body into a sack and, in an attempt to dispose of the evidence, cast the sack into the waters of the nearby Loire River. Upon learning of this heinous crime, Count Theobald decreed that those involved in the act be sentenced to death by burning. 1144 AD. On March 20th, a 12-year-old boy named William disappeared. The last time William was seen alive by his family was on Holy Tuesday, when he went into the house of a local Jew for work. His body was discovered days later in Thorpwood, near Norwich. Thomas, a monk who would later document the events, stated that the local Jewish community kidnapped William and murdered him in a ritualistic fashion. On Good Friday, William had been tortured, with his body pierced by sharp instruments, and was ultimately crucified in a manner resembling the Passion of Christ. 1179 AD. On March 25th in Pontoise, France, within the cellar of the local castle, a 12-year-old Christian child named Richard was subjected to brutal torture by members of the Jewish community. He was then affixed to a cross, where he was slowly bled to death amid the mocking cries of a frenzied Jewish crowd. 1305 AD. During the Easter season in Prague, members of the Jewish community crucified a boy who, driven by poverty, had been forced to serve them. The boy was stripped naked and nailed to a cross, where he was subjected to relentless flogging until he ultimately bled to death. The outrage among the local population was so intense that they took matters into their own hands by attacking the Jewish quarter and enacting a violent reprisal that resulted in the massacre of the entire Jewish population of Prague. 1345 AD. In Munich, Jews subjected a young child named Henrik to a brutal and violent death. They meticulously drained all his blood through a series of piercings and incisions, opening his veins and inflicting over 60 stab wounds. The atrocity was uncovered by chance, leading to the conviction of several Jews who were sentenced to be executed by fire. In the aftermath of this atrocity, the church canonized Henrik. 1452 AD. In Savona, several members of the Jewish community were involved in the killing of a 2-year-old child. The body of the child was punctured repeatedly, and the blood was collected in vessels typically used during circumcision rituals. The blood-drained corpse was then discarded into a cesspool. An eyewitness, the young son of a physician, later recounted the event. He recounted how one individual held the child by the right arm, another by the left, and a third by the head, while the fourth used a sharp instrument to stab the child's belly and heart. As the child succumbed, the blood was collected in a basin and the body was hidden away. They ate fruits such as apples and berries after dipping them in the collected blood. The witness claimed to have consumed some of this, and the horror of the experience overwhelmed him so much that he was unable to eat for 2 days. 1480 AD. In the Portobufole region, a 7-year-old boy named Sebastiano Novello from Bergamo was brutally murdered by several Jews, which drained his blood. Their guilt was proven beyond doubt during extensive and lengthy hearings. Subsequently, on St. Mark's Place in Venice, in front of the Doge's Palace, the perpetrators were publicly executed by burning. Sebastiano was later canonized. The Italian humanist from Verona, Giorgio Somariva, wrote the text, "The Martyrdom of Sebastiano Novello, butchered by the treacherous Jews," which was composed in verse and printed in Treviso in 1480. 1486 AD. In the city of Regensburg, a disturbing incident involving the ritualistic torture and murder of 6 Christian children by members of the local Jewish community was reported. The bodies of the 6 victims were discovered in the cellar of a house owned by a Jewish man identified as Joseph. During the subsequent investigation, authorities uncovered a large stone block positioned in a manner resembling an altar at the same location. Notably, traces of blood were found on the surface of the stone, further heightening suspicions of ritualistic practices associated with the crime. 1540 AD. During the Easter period, a 3-year-old boy named Michael, who resided in Serpentfield, was abducted by Jewish merchants. The child was forcibly taken to an undisclosed location, where he was secured to a pillar and subjected to severe torture over a span of 3 days. During this period, the boy's fingers and toes were mutilated, and numerous incisions were made across his body in the shape of crosses. Following his death, his body was concealed under a layer of dry foliage. The discovery of the child's body was aided by a shepherd's dog. Additionally, a Jewish child disclosed to a non-Jewish companion that a child had been tortured to death. The Jewish community of Serpentfield was expelled. 1747 AD. In Izyaslav, the mutilated body of an unidentified man was found in the melting snow. The right hand had been amputated at the fingers, with blood vessels opened to the elbow and bones splintered. On the left hand, 3 fingers were missing, and the blood vessels and tendons were pulled out to the shoulder. 3 toes on the left foot were amputated, nails were torn off, blood vessels were cut out of the calves, and the teeth were knocked out. The entire body bore numerous stab wounds. The interrogations revealed that the murder had been carried out under the orders of the Kahal of Izyaslav, Kahal meaning Jewish congregation. A wandering journeyman had been intoxicated at a Jewish gin mill, then tortured, mutilated, and ritually killed in the presence of the Kahal elders. The torture occurred over several days, with the blood collected and sent to the Rabbi of Izyaslav. The Jewish innkeeper, the Kahal elder, the Hazan, the Mohel, and the Biddle of Izyaslav synagogue were indicted. On April 26, 1748, 8 Jews were sentenced to what the court termed the most serious and cruel punishment, which included live impaling, flaying, quartering alive, and on one instance, the removal of a heart. 1753 AD. On Good Friday, 20th April, in a village near Kiev, 3-year-old Stefan, the son of a nobleman named Adam, was kidnapped by members of the Jewish community. The child was hidden in a tavern until the end of the Sabbath, after which he was ritually sacrificed with the involvement of Rabbi Shmaja. The blood was collected in several bottles. The body was then discarded in a nearby forest, where it was discovered by local villagers on Easter Sunday. Documents related to the case were recorded and preserved in the court of Kiev. The child was considered a martyr, and his remains were moved to the local church. 1791 AD. On February 21st, in the small village of Per, a 13-year-old boy named Andreas was ritually murdered. Abraham, a Jewish man, was arrested in connection with the incident. During the court proceedings, Abraham's son testified, stating that his father, along with the rabbi and other Jewish individuals from outside the area, had participated in the killing of Andreas. At night, father came home with some other Jews, among whom also the rabbi. They took from Andreas his guba, removed his shirt, stuffed his mouth with clay, and Jacob tied his feet together, hung him up by a cord from a beam, and then cut open the vein on the right side of his neck, while father held a leaden basin to catch the blood. Daniel Hexe, a Reformed pastor and witness to the autopsy, noted that during the dissection, on February 24th, the boy's body was drained of blood, with only a few drops emerging from the left arm, while the internal organs were completely bloodless, and the diaphragm, sexual organs, and bladder were torn apart. 1840 AD. On February 5th, an Italian monk named Father Thomas passed through the Jewish quarters to post a notice about an auction at the home of a deceased resident. When he did not return home for dinner, his Muslim servant Ibrahim Amra went to the Jewish quarters to search for him. Neither individual was seen again. A Jewish barber, Solomon Halleck, confessed that upon arriving at David Harari's house, he encountered the gathering consisting of the 3 Harari brothers, Joseph Leniado, and 2 rabbis. He observed Father Thomas lying on the floor, with his arms bound behind his back and his mouth gagged. He was instructed to kill Father Thomas, but he declined, citing a lack of courage. He was permitted to leave after being promised money in exchange for his silence. David Harari used a large knife to slit Father Thomas's throat. Meanwhile, the two rabbis and Harari's brother meticulously drained his blood. David Harari's servant, Murad al-Fatal, was ordered to do the same to Ibrahim Amra. He later confessed that the blood had been collected into a basin and then put into a white bottle called kalabier. Rabbi Afia confessed that the blood was intended for making, quote, consecrated bread for specific Jewish holidays. But he also clarified that the bread was only given to hakams and zealots. The office of the Governor General, which included a rabbi who had converted from Judaism to Islam, asserted that the blood was drained for the Passover celebration. He noted that in Judaism, there are two kinds of blood pleasing to God, the blood of the Passover and the blood of circumcision. This statement likely references the Midrash Rabbah text, specifically Ruth Rabbah 6:1. Eliyahu Picciotto, the Austrian consul in Aleppo, reported the incident to Jewish communities across Europe. This led to the intervention of influential leaders within the global Jewish community, notably the Rothschild family and the Jewish financier and banker Moses Montefiore, who personally approached the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire to secure the release of the prisoners. Subsequently, the accused individuals were released. It's important to see the historical track record of these accusations because they are beginning to resurface once more. These records also tell us that Jews have not been isolated and rejected across history out of jealousy and the mere reason that they are, quote, God's chosen people. It was due to their proven track record of ritualistic murder of Christians and Gentiles, especially the children. In 1442 AD, after the murder of a 4-year-old Christian girl named Ursula Pock in Lienz, Tyrol, was proven to be by the Jews of that town, the emperor issued an edict mandating their expulsion, citing this among the reasons for the action. Jews have pitifully tortured Christian children and used their blood for their damnable substance. There is almost no land, and in each land, hardly one region to be found, in which the Jewish cruelty has not washed its murderous hands in the blood of innocent Christian children. End quote. One commenter, on reading these accounts in full, said, there is zero chance that hundreds of recorded cases, separated by hundreds of years and thousands of miles, across different languages and cultures, in the absence of mass media, all just told the same lies. End quote. There was a recent discovery of an illegal tunnel beneath a synagogue in New York City, reported on January 8, 2024. The Anti-Defamation League and several newspapers reported that the tunnel's discovery ignited, quote, child trafficking and blood libel conspiracy theories. Another incident was reported on December 24, 2024. Authorities in Guatemala rescued 160 minors from a Jewish sect named Lev Tahor. They added that there have been concerns over controversial practices by the Lev Tahor sect, which had faced similar allegations in the past. Based on the statements of the complainants, the evidence obtained, and the medical examinations, it was possible to establish that there are forms of human trafficking against these minors, such as forced marriage, abuse, and related crimes, said Nancy Paez, a prosecutor at Guatemala's Prosecution Office Against Human Trafficking. This astounding news was not covered by any mainstream media. However, it further supports the strong speculation that Jews are as well heavily involved in worldwide human trafficking and organ harvesting. One outlet states, Israel is the organ harvesting and human trafficking capital of the world, with complicit help from the United States and Turkey. It writes, the ruling elite behind Greater Israel Project deploys the US empire to manufacture unlawful wars and the subsequent largest migration crisis since World War II. They willfully and methodically destabilize the world, generating such dire human living conditions that expedite the formation of a one-world government. The all-too-common human story is that thousands of Syrians, unable to find work, trapped in inhumane conditions at migrant refugee camps in adjacent countries, have opted to desperately sell their organs in order to support their families. Parasitic criminal gangs and international cabal rings opportunistically set up thriving predatory operations. They exploit the surplus of war refugees by organizing intricate organ trafficking networks throughout countries like Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. End quote. There is some truth to this claim. More than half a dozen years ago, the largest Swedish daily newspaper, the Aftonbladet, reported that Israel engaged in systematic harvesting of organs belonging to Palestinians being killed by the bloodthirsty apartheid government. The Swedish freelance journalist Donald Bostrom documented the case of a 19-year-old Palestinian man named Bilal Ahmed Ghanem, who was murdered by Israeli soldiers in 1992 in the West Bank village of Imatin. Bostrom was an eyewitness to the raid. Israeli soldiers entered the village and targeted Ghanem at the gate of his family's home and called his name, Bilal, Bilal. He turned around and was shot dead. Instead of allowing his body to be recovered by his family, the Israelis immediately abducted his corpse using an ambulance and a military helicopter, which was staged and ready to transport the young man's body to the hospital. A week later, his body was returned to his family with an incision from his neck to his stomach, suggesting his organs had been taken. His brother, Jalal Ghanem, said, "It was very clear that there was no abdomen. It showed in the way he was stitched. There were no teeth in his mouth." End quote. Other Palestinian men were being abducted by the Israelis that year, which coincided with the shortage of organs for transplant in Israel. Israel later admitted to this organ theft, saying, "Harvested organs were alleged to have been used by the military and public hospital. Israel has admitted that it harvested organs from the dead bodies of Palestinians in the 1990s without permission from their families." The admission follows the release of an interview with Yehuda Hiss, the former head of Israel's Forensic Institute, in which he said that workers at the institute harvested skin, corneas, heart valves, and bones from Palestinians and foreign workers. End quote. In July 2009, the FBI conducted raids involving money laundering and bribery, arresting 44 persons, including 5 rabbis. The human trafficking ring was uncovered in part of the investigation. One of the rabbis arrested said that he had been in the human trafficking business for 10 years. His business was to entice vulnerable people to give up a kidney for $1,000, which he would then turn around and sell for $160,000. Many have falsely believed that Judaism is an Abrahamic faith and therefore follows the Torah, but as we have seen, Judaism has strong ties with occultism such as Freemasonry. Many think a synagogue is a religious place of worship for the Jews, but synagogue simply means a gathering of Jews for the advancement of Jewish purposes. Jews do not follow the Torah, they follow the Talmud. Because of this, it is not a contradiction for one to be an atheist Jew. Likewise, to them, it is not a sin to be a Jew practicing homosexuality, which is otherwise an abomination according to the Torah. Jews have contributed significantly to the advancement of the LGBTQ movement. I will name a few who have shaped society's understanding, acceptance, and overall normalization of homosexuality. George Cecil Ives. The LGBTQ movement unofficially started with the creation of a secret British society in the 1890s. It was called the Order of Keronia. It campaigned for the legalization of homosexuality. It was founded by Jewish writer George Cecil Ives. One famous member was Oscar Wilde. Looking at the screenshots from their website, the website is named Order of Keronia, a fraternity of male lovers. They say, "The order is a religion of love and lovers, a service and an attitude towards mystery with no divine revelation. The mythic origin of the order dates back to the year 338 BCE and the Battle of Keronia, where 300 male lovers perished in the arms of their beloved ones. The cause. The cause is that of lovers who have been wronged due to their exercise of free, consensual love with an emphasis on male lovers. Of importance is how this same exact rhetoric is applied in homosexual campaigns for, quote, acceptance. Love is love. Why should God be against love? Why should we interfere with what free, consenting individuals do? Human beings are complex and love comes in various forms. Let's be open-minded and accept all forms of love. This website is telling us that all this vernacular was directly the brainchild of Jews. Normalization of homosexuality and, quote, alternative lifestyles is the brainchild of the Jews. America, being the largest proponents of such homosexual campaigns, tells it that America as a whole is chiefly owned by the Jews. Magnus Hirschfeld. Magnus Hirschfeld was a German sexologist known for being one of the first pioneers of transgender rights. He coined the term transvestite and facilitated the first sex change surgeries in Europe. A significant portion of his work was destroyed by the Nazis. He founded the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin 1897 to explore the science of sexuality, building on his previous campaigns for science-backed LGBTQ tolerance. This first Institute for Sexual Science had many of the researchers focused on the unprecedented subject of sexual orientation and gender identity. It was also the site of the first recorded, quote, sex reassignment surgery in Europe. The key figures were all Jewish. Emma Goldman. Emma Goldman was an anarchist and one of the earliest political activists to speak in defense of homosexual relationships. Her belief that social liberation should extend to gay people was unheard of at the time, even among anarchists. She was expelled from the US in 1919. George Weinberg. George Weinberg was an American psychologist. He coined the term homophobia in the 1960s. He led in the successful struggle to have homosexuality removed as a diagnostic category from the DSM. That is, having homosexuality removed from being labeled a mental disorder. Reed Erickson. The first public homosexual organization in the US was the One Institute, which was bankrolled by a wealthy Jewish transsexual named Reed Erickson. He later created the Erickson Educational Foundation, which contributed millions of dollars to the early development of the LGBTQ movement. Leo Abse. The first law to decriminalize homosexual acts in Britain was the Sexual Offences Bill of 1967. It was proposed by Jewish lawyer and politician Leo Abse. Abse later founded a humanist group that promoted homosexual and abortion law reforms as well as, quote, racial equality. Please note that racial equality in access to abortion has led to the abortion rates of the Afro peoples, particularly African American community, becoming higher than that of any other group. Many have asserted that the campaigns for abortion accessibility among Afro-American peoples are nothing but a veiled form of genocide. One woman, Latasia Copeland Tyrones, in her piece, Black Abortions, The Truth About Abortions and Black Genocide, testifies saying, speaking from both personal and professional experience, I am a trained healthcare administrator and former registered nursing student. I know for a fact that Afro-American mothers are constantly pressured by doctors and society as a whole to have abortions. And if the mother has more than 3 children, they are pressured to have their tubes tied, just like I was. This is but one example of how racism manifests itself within the American healthcare system. End quote. Reports have revealed that 36% of all abortions in the US in 2014 were performed on Black women. Meanwhile, Black people only make up 13.3% of the total American population. Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was a Jewish politician and the first openly gay man to be elected to public office in California as a member of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. He was described as, quote, the most significant LGBTQ official ever elected in the United States. He was later accused of pedophilia, whereby he had a long record of physically abusing his underage live-in, quote, boyfriends. After one of them committed suicide in his apartment, he moved another one in 2 weeks later. It is a well-established fact that he had a relationship with a 16-year-old homeless boy that he met in New York when he was 33. In a biography on Harvey Milk, Randy Shields notes that, explaining Milk's many flings and affairs with teenagers and young men, Milk told one lover why it is okay for him to have multiple relationships simultaneously. Quote, as homosexuals, we can't depend on the heterosexual model. We grow up with the heterosexual model, but we don't have to follow it. We should be developing our own lifestyle. There's no reason why you cannot love more than one person at the same time." End quote. He was assassinated in 1978 and portrayed as, quote, "a martyr for the LGBTQ and a gay icon." Frank Kameny. Frank Kameny was an LGBTQ rights activist often referred to as, quote, "one of the most significant figures in the American gay rights movement." He filed the first known civil rights claim based on sexual orientation, pursued in a U.S. court. He became the first openly gay candidate for the U.S. Congress. Brenda Howard. Brenda Howard was an American rights activist and polyamorist. She was known as, quote, "the mother of pride" for her leading role in coordinating the first LGBTQ Pride March in 1970. Howard said of herself, "The next time someone asks you why LGBTQ Pride March exists, or why Gay Pride Month is in June, tell them a bisexual woman named Brenda Howard thought it should be." Joel Simchai. Joel Simchai is an Israeli-American tech entrepreneur and the founder and former CEO of Grindr. Grindr is a social networking and dating app for the LGBTQ, which is one of the largest and most popular mobile apps in the world. He is a homosexual, and so are his two brothers. Jazz Jennings. Jazz Jennings is an American YouTube personality and is notable for being one of the youngest publicly documented people to identify as transgender. Jews have also contributed greatly to the pornography industry. Although Jews allegedly make up less than 2% of the American population, they produce the vast majority of the nation's pornography. An article from the Jewish Quarterly, written by a well-known Jewish historian and professor, boasts that Jews control the porn industry out of Gentile hatred. I read, "We Jews run porn and use it as a weapon against Gentiles." Jewish involvement in the X-rated industry can be seen as a proverbial two fingers to the entire WASP establishment in America. Some porn stars viewed themselves as frontline fighters in the spiritual battle between Christian America and secular humanism. According to Ford, Jewish X-rated actors often brag about their, quote, "joy in being anarchic, sexual gadflies to the puritanical beast." Jewish involvement in porn by this argument is as a result of atavistic hatred of Christians and authority. They are trying to weaken the dominant culture by moral subversion. End quote. According to Jewish supremacist, university lecturer, and porn historian Nathan Abrams, Jewish involvement in pornography has a long history in the United States, as Jews have helped transform a fringe subculture into what has become a primary constituent of Americana. End quote. It would not be a stretch to say that Jews have been largely successful in their secularist agenda against what was formerly a Christian America. Alvin Goldstein was a Jewish American pornographer, best known for his helping normalize hardcore pornography in the United States. When asked why Jews dominate porn industry, he stated clearly, "The only reason that Jews play a role in porn industry is that we hate Christ." Pornhub, one of the most popular internet pornography video sharing websites, is owned by an Ashkenazi rabbi named Solomon Friedman. His private equity firm took over MindGeek, the umbrella company of virtually every porn site. The site has come under fire for sharing pornographic content involving minors. Knowing this, the rabbi claimed to be taking ownership of the site with the intention of, quote, "making it better." I'll see you in part 3.